Sometimes life throws you curveballs that are so unexpected, so completely shocking, that they change everything you thought you knew about fate, forgiveness, and second chances. What happens when a single father, struggling to rebuild his life after a painful divorce, walks into an upscale restaurant for what he thinks is just another blind date, only to come face to face with the one person who made his life a living hell during the worst period of his existence? This isn't just another dating story. This is about Marcus Thompson, a 34-year-old software engineer from Atlanta, whose world was about to be turned completely upside down by a woman he never expected to see again. A woman who had once called him every terrible name in the book, who had tried to poison his own children against him, and who had made it clear that in her eyes, he would never be good enough for her daughter. What Marcus did next didn't just shock everyone at that restaurant that night. It shocked the entire community, went viral on social media, and ultimately taught thousands of people a lesson about grace, dignity, and the power of choosing love over hate. But before we get to that incredible moment, you need to understand the journey that led Marcus to that table, on that night, facing the woman who had once been his worst enemy. Get ready for a story that will challenge everything you think you know about forgiveness, family, and what it truly means to be the bigger person when life gives you the perfect opportunity for revenge. Marcus Thompson had always believed that love could conquer anything. At 28, he was head over heels for Sarah Mitchell, a beautiful kindergarten teacher with honey-colored skin and the brightest smile he had ever seen. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Atlanta, where Marcus was working on his laptop, debugging code for his software development company, and Sarah was grading papers at the next table. Their courtship was like something out of a romantic movie. Marcus would bring Sarah lunch during her breaks, they would spend weekends exploring antique shops and hiking trails, and within 6 months, he knew she was the one. He proposed on a sunset beach in Savannah, and Sarah said yes with tears streaming down her face.
Everything seemed perfect, like they were living in their own little bubble of happiness.
But bubbles have a way of bursting when they meet sharp edges, and the sharpest edge in Marcus and Sarah's relationship came in the form of Patricia Mitchell, Sarah's mother. From the moment Marcus met Patricia at a family barbecue, he could feel the chill in her handshake and see the disapproval in her eyes. She was a woman who carried herself with the kind of rigid pride that came from old Southern money and even older Southern prejudices. Patricia had made it clear from day one that she didn't approve of her daughter dating Marcus. It wasn't necessarily about race, though. Marcus suspected that played a part. Patricia's disapproval ran deeper than skin color. She saw Marcus as beneath her daughter's social standing. He came from a working-class family in East Atlanta. His father was a mechanic, and his mother worked as a hotel housekeeper. Patricia, on the other hand, came from a family that owned several successful businesses in the city and lived in a mansion in Buckhead. During their engagement, Patricia would make subtle comments that cut like a knife. She would suggest that Sarah could do better, hint that Marcus was only interested in marrying up, and constantly question whether he could provide the kind of life her daughter deserved. When Marcus and Sarah announced their pregnancy just 3 months after their wedding, Patricia's disapproval turned into outright hostility. The birth of their first child, a beautiful daughter they named Zoe, should have been a moment of pure joy. Marcus remembered holding his baby girl for the first time, feeling like his heart might burst from happiness. But even in that sacred moment, Patricia managed to cast a shadow. She made comments about the baby's appearance, wondering aloud if Zoe would look more like her mother as she grew older, as if Marcus's features were somehow undesirable. 2 years later, when their son David was born, the situation only got worse. Patricia had convinced herself that Marcus was holding Sarah back from her true potential. She would visit their home uninvited, criticize Marcus's parenting, and constantly whisper poison into Sarah's ears about how she had settled for less than she deserved. Marcus tried to be the bigger person. He bit his tongue when Patricia made her cutting remarks. He smiled and nodded when she questioned his decisions. And he even went out of his way to include her in family activities, hoping that time and proximity would help her see him as the man who truly loved her daughter. For 5 years, Marcus fought a quiet war against Patricia's influence. He watched as his mother-in-law slowly but systematically turned his wife against him. Sarah began to question every decision Marcus made, from the house they lived in to the school they chose for Zoe. She started spending more and more time at her mother's house, often taking the children with her for days at a time. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in October. Marcus had been working late, trying to finish a project that would bring in a substantial bonus for their family. He came home to find Sarah packing suitcases in their bedroom. The children were nowhere to be seen, and the house felt eerily quiet. Sarah looked up at him with tears in her eyes, but her jaw was set with determination. She told him that she couldn't do it anymore, that she felt like she was living a lie, and that her mother had helped her see that they wanted different things from life. Marcus tried to fight for their marriage, begged her to go to counseling, promised to change whatever needed changing, but Sarah's mind was made up. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Patricia had hired one of the most ruthless family attorneys in Atlanta, and they came after Marcus with everything they had. They painted him as an unfit father, questioned his ability to provide for his children, and even suggested that his work schedule made him emotionally unavailable to his family. Marcus fought back with everything he had, not for money or property, but for his children. He hired his own attorney, documented every interaction, and presented evidence of what a loving and involved father he had been. The custody battle stretched on for 8 months, draining Marcus emotionally and financially. In the end, the judge awarded Sarah primary custody, with Marcus getting the children every other weekend and one evening during the week. It was devastating, but Marcus accepted it because he knew that any time with his children was precious. He moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment closer to their school, making sure he could be there for every soccer game, school play, and parent-teacher conference that his custody schedule allowed. The first few months after the divorce were the darkest period of Marcus's life. He would sit in his empty apartment after dropping the children off, wondering where everything had gone wrong. He replayed conversations, questioned his decisions, and battled a depression that threatened to swallow him whole. His work performance suffered. His social life disappeared, and some days he struggled just to get out of bed. But Marcus was stronger than he knew. He started seeing a therapist, joined a support group for divorced fathers, and slowly began to rebuild his life. He focused on being the best father he could be during the time he had with his children, creating traditions and memories that would last a lifetime. He took Zoe to daddy-daughter dances and taught David how to throw a football in the park behind his apartment complex. As the months turned into years, Marcus found his footing again. His work life improved, he started exercising regularly, and he even began to consider the possibility of dating again. His friends encouraged him to get back out there, telling him that he deserved to find love again and that his children needed to see him happy. That's how Marcus found himself, 3 years after his divorce was finalized, sitting across from his best friend Jake at their favorite sports bar, listening to Jake's enthusiastic pitch about a woman he absolutely had to meet. Jake had been Marcus's college roommate, and their friendship had survived marriages, divorces, and everything in between. Jake worked in marketing and had an infectious enthusiasm for life that Marcus had always envied. He was the kind of person who believed that there was someone perfect for everyone, and he had made it his personal mission to help Marcus find that person. The woman Jake wanted to set Marcus up with was named Alina Rodriguez. She was a nurse at Emory Hospital, recently divorced herself, and according to Jake, she was beautiful, intelligent, and had a great sense of humor. Jake had met her through his sister, who worked at the same hospital, and he was convinced that she and Marcus would hit it off. Marcus was hesitant at first. The few dates he had been on since his divorce had been awkward disasters, filled with forced conversation and the underlying tension of two people trying too hard to connect. But Jake was persistent, and eventually, Marcus agreed to let Jake set up the blind date. They chose a nice restaurant in Midtown Atlanta called the Garden Table, known for its intimate atmosphere and excellent food. Jake handled all the arrangements, even going so far as to make the reservation himself. He told Marcus to wear his navy blue suit, the one that made him look like $1 million, and to just be himself. The night of the date, Marcus spent extra time getting ready. He trimmed his beard, made sure his shoes were polished, and even splashed on a little cologne. As he looked at himself in the mirror, he felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that he hadn't experienced in years. Maybe Jake was right. Maybe it was time to open his heart to the possibility of love again. Marcus arrived at the Garden Table 15 minutes early, just as his mother had taught him to do for important occasions. The restaurant was elegant but not pretentious, with soft lighting and tasteful jazz music playing in the background. The hostess showed him to a table by the window, where he could watch the early evening crowd stroll by on Peachtree Street. He ordered a glass of wine and checked his phone, seeing a text from Jake wishing him luck and reminding him to relax and have fun. Marcus smiled, feeling grateful for friends who cared about his happiness. He looked around the restaurant, noting the other couples enjoying their meals, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to be part of a couple again. The hostess approached his table at exactly 7 o'clock, which was the time Jake had arranged for the date. Marcus looked up with a smile, ready to greet the woman who might become an important part of his life. But as his eyes focused on the figure following the hostess to his table, his smile froze on his face, and his wine glass nearly slipped from his hand. It wasn't Elena Rodriguez approaching his table. It was Patricia Mitchell, his ex-mother-in-law, looking just as shocked and horrified as he felt. She was dressed elegantly in a black cocktail dress, her silver hair perfectly styled, and her face bore the same expression of disgusted surprise that Marcus remembered so well from their years as reluctant family members. For a moment, time seemed to stop.
The restaurant noise faded into the background, and Marcus felt like he was in a surreal dream.
Patricia stood frozen halfway between the hostess station and his table, her mouth slightly open in shock.
Other diners began to notice the awkward scene, glancing over with curious expressions. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process what was happening. How was it possible that Patricia was his blind date? Had Jake somehow got the names confused? Was this some kind of elaborate practical joke? Or worse, was this Patricia's way of humiliating him one more time? The hostess, oblivious to the tension, continued toward the table with a bright smile. Patricia seemed to shake herself out of her shock and followed reluctantly, her face now set in the familiar mask of cold disapproval that Marcus knew so well. As she reached the table, Marcus stood up, years of his mother's etiquette training kicking in automatically despite the bizarre circumstances. They stood there for what felt like an eternity. Two people who had once been bitter enemies, now faced with the impossible situation of being each other's blind date. The air between them crackled with unresolved tension, painful memories, and the weight of all the terrible things that had been said during those dark months of divorce proceedings. Other diners were definitely watching now, sensing the drama unfolding at the table by the window. Marcus could feel their eyes on him, could almost hear the whispered speculations about what was happening between the well-dressed black man and the elegant older white woman who looked like she had seen a ghost. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she looked at Marcus, and he could see her mind working, probably wondering if this was some kind of setup, some elaborate revenge plot that he had orchestrated. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here was the woman who had spent years trying to prove that he wasn't good enough for her daughter, now faced with the possibility that fate had made her his potential romantic interest. Marcus felt a dozen different emotions washing over him at once. Anger at the situation, embarrassment at the public nature of their awkward encounter, curiosity about how this had happened, and underneath it all, a strange sense of cosmic justice. The woman who had made his life hell was now in the most vulnerable position possible, dependent on his response to determine how this evening would unfold. The hostess, still smiling brightly, gestured toward the chair across from Marcus. Patricia looked at the chair, then at Marcus, then back at the chair, as if she was calculating the odds of simply turning around and walking out of the restaurant. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing out on her face, the war between her pride and her curiosity about what would happen next. And in that moment, as Marcus looked at the woman who had been his adversary for so many years, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. A decision that would shock everyone in that restaurant, everyone who knew their history, and ultimately, themselves most of all. Marcus took a deep breath and did something that surprised everyone in that restaurant, including himself. Instead of walking away, instead of making a scene, instead of letting years of accumulated hurt and anger dictate his response, he smiled. Not a fake smile or a sarcastic smirk, but a genuine, warm smile that seemed to light up his entire face. He pulled out Patricia's chair and gestured for her to sit down, his voice calm and respectful as he said, "Mrs. Mitchell, what an unexpected surprise. Please have a seat." The shock on Patricia's face was unmistakable. She had clearly expected anger, confrontation, or at the very least an immediate exit from the situation. Instead, she was being treated with the kind of courtesy and respect that she had never shown Marcus during all their years as reluctant family members. The other diners, who had been watching the drama unfold, seemed equally surprised by this turn of events. Patricia hesitated for a moment, her pride warring with her curiosity. She could have left. She could have made a scene. She could have demanded to know how this had happened and stormed out in righteous indignation. But something in Marcus's demeanor, something in the genuine kindness of his gesture, made her pause. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, she slowly sat down. Marcus returned to his own seat, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to navigate this impossible situation. The hostess, seemingly relieved that the awkwardness had passed, handed Patricia a menu and promised that their server would be with them shortly. As she walked away, Marcus and Patricia found themselves alone together for the first time since the final custody hearing 3 years ago. The silence stretched between them, filled with years of unspoken resentment and painful memories. Patricia studied her menu with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex mathematical equation, while Marcus sipped his wine and tried to wrap his head around the surreal nature of their situation. Finally, he broke the silence. "I have to admit, Mrs. Mitchell, When Jake told me he was setting me up with someone special, I never imagined it would be you. Marcus said, his tone light but not mocking. I'm guessing you're just as surprised as I am. Patricia looked up from her menu, her eyes weary. This is some kind of joke, isn't it? Some elaborate setup to humiliate me? Her voice carried the same edge it had during their worst confrontations. But underneath, Marcus could hear something else. Vulnerability, perhaps. Or maybe just confusion. Marcus shook his head, his expression sincere. I promise you, Mrs. Duz. Mitchell, I had no idea you would be here tonight. My friend Jake arranged this through his sister, who works at Emory Hospital. Apparently, there was some kind of mix-up with the names or the arrangements. I'm just as confused as you are. Patricia set down her menu and studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of deception. She had spent years convinced that Marcus was manipulative and calculating, but now, faced with his obvious sincerity, she found herself questioning some of her long-held assumptions. Elena Rodriguez, Patricia said quietly. That's who I was supposed to meet tonight. My neighbor's nephew thought we might hit it off. Marcus nodded, the pieces starting to come together. That's exactly who Jake wanted me to meet. Elena Rodriguez, a nurse at Emory Hospital. Somehow our friends must have gotten their wires crossed, and we ended up as each other's mystery date. The server appeared at their table, a young woman with a bright smile who seemed completely oblivious to the tension. She introduced herself as Jennifer and began to explain the evening's specials. Both Marcus and Patricia listened politely, though their minds were clearly elsewhere. When Jennifer finished, Patricia ordered a glass of white wine, and Marcus asked for another red. As Jennifer walked away, Patricia looked directly at Marcus for the first time since sitting down. Why didn't you leave? She asked. Why didn't you just walk away the moment you saw me? God knows you had every reason to. Marcus considered the question carefully. It was a fair one, and he owed her an honest answer. 3 years ago, Mrs. as well, Mitchell, I probably would have. 3 years ago, I was so angry and hurt that I would have seen this as an opportunity to embarrass you the way I felt you had embarrassed me. But I'm not that person anymore. He paused, swirling the wine in his glass as he searched for the right words. My therapist helped me understand something important. Carrying around all that anger and resentment wasn't hurting you at all. It was only hurting me, and by extension, it was hurting my children. They needed to see their father as someone who chose grace over grudges, love over hate. Patricia's expression softened slightly, though she still looked guarded. You're in therapy? Marcus nodded. Started about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. Best decision I ever made. It helped me work through a lot of things, including my feelings about you and what happened between us. Their drinks arrived, providing a momentary distraction from the intensity of their conversation. Patricia took a sip of her wine, and Marcus could see her processing his words. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, less defensive. I suppose you think I'm a terrible person, she said. A bitter old woman who destroyed her own daughter's marriage out of spite. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering his response carefully. I think you're a mother who loves her daughter and wanted what she thought was best for her. I may not have agreed with your methods, and I certainly didn't appreciate some of the things you said about me, but I never doubted that your actions came from a place of love for Sarah. Patricia's eyes widened in surprise. This was not the response she had expected. She had prepared herself for accusations, for him to list all the ways she had wronged him, for him to make her face the consequences of her actions. Instead, she was being offered understanding, maybe even forgiveness.
You don't understand, Patricia said, her voice beginning to crack slightly.
The things I said about you, the way I treated you, it was inexcusable. I called you names that I'm ashamed to even remember. I tried to turn your own children against you. I convinced Sarah that you were holding her back, that she could do better. I destroyed your family, Marcus. How can you sit here and be so kind to me? Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. Mrs. Petticoat Road, Mitchell, can I ask you something? Why did you dislike me so much? And please, don't say it was because you thought I wasn't good enough for Sarah. I always felt like there was something deeper going on. Patricia was quiet for a long time, staring into her wine glass as if it might contain the answers she was looking for. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. You reminded me of my first husband, she said. Sarah's father. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah had rarely talked about her father, only mentioning that he had left when she was very young. Patricia had never remarried, raising Sarah as a single mother with the help of her own wealthy parents. He was charming, handsome, hard-working, Patricia continued. Everything a young woman could want in a husband. He swept me off my feet just like you did with Sarah. We were so happy at first, just like you two were. But then the responsibilities started piling up. The mortgage, the baby, the pressure to provide the kind of life I was used to having. He started working longer hours, spending more time away from home. And then one day, he was just gone. Left a note saying he couldn't handle the pressure anymore. Marcus felt a wave of understanding wash over him. And you thought I would do the same thing to Sarah. Patricia nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. I saw so many similarities between you two. The way you looked at her, the way you promised her the world, the way you made her believe that love was enough to overcome anything. I couldn't bear the thought of watching my daughter go through what I went through, so I convinced myself that you were just like him, and I did everything I could to protect her from what I saw as inevitable heartbreak. The revelation hung in the air between them, changing the entire context of their relationship. Marcus realized that Patricia's actions, as hurtful as they had been, came from a place of deep personal trauma and a desperate desire to protect her daughter from experiencing the same pain she had endured. Mrs. Mitchell, Marcus said gently, I'm not Sarah's father. I would never have abandoned my family, no matter how difficult things got. Yes, I worked hard, sometimes too hard, but it was because I wanted to provide for my family, not because I was looking for an escape. Patricia wiped at her eyes with her napkin, struggling to maintain her composure in the public setting. I know that now, she whispered. I've known it for a long time, actually. Watching you fight so hard for custody of your children, seeing how devoted you remained to them even after everything fell apart, I realized that you were nothing like him. But by then, it was too late. The damage was done. Marcus reached across the table and gently placed his hand over Patricia's, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. It's never too late, Mrs. Mitchell. Maybe we can't undo the past, but we can choose how we move forward from here. Patricia looked down at their joined hands, amazed by the warmth and comfort she felt from this simple gesture of kindness. For 3 years, she had lived with the guilt of what she had done, knowing that her actions had destroyed not just Marcus and Sarah's marriage, but also her relationship with her own grandchildren. Zoe and David still visited her, but there was a distance there now, a confusion about why Daddy couldn't come to Grandma's house anymore. How is Sarah? Marcus asked, his voice gentle. Is she happy? Patricia's face clouded over. She's engaged to a lawyer named Richard. He's everything I thought I wanted for her. Wealthy, well-connected, from a good family. But she's not happy, Marcus. She goes through the motions, plans the wedding, smiles at the right moments. But I can see it in her eyes. She's not happy. Marcus felt a pang of sadness, not just for himself, but for Sarah. I'm sorry to hear that. Despite everything that happened, I still want her to be happy. She deserves that. Patricia looked up at him with amazement. After everything I put you through, everything you lost because of my interference, you can still say that about her? Marcus smiled sadly. I loved her, Mrs. Mitchell. That doesn't just go away because things didn't work out between us. And more importantly, she's the mother of my children. Her happiness affects their happiness, and their happiness is the most important thing in the world to me. Their server returned to take their dinner orders, providing another brief respite from the emotional intensity of their conversation. Marcus ordered the grilled salmon, and Patricia chose the chicken marsala. As Jennifer walked away again, Patricia looked at Marcus with a new expression on her face, one he had never seen before during all their years as adversaries. I owe you an apology, she said. Actually, I owe you 1,000 apologies, but that seems inadequate for what I've done. Marcus shook his head. Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate that, but you don't owe me anything. We both made mistakes during that difficult time. I could have tried harder to understand your perspective, to address your concerns instead of just dismissing them as prejudice. No, Patricia said firmly. You don't understand. I didn't just interfere in your marriage. I actively worked to destroy it. I planted seeds of doubt in Sarah's mind, made her question every decision you made, every motive you had. I told her that you were using her, that you would never be able to provide for her the way she deserved. She paused, struggling with the admission. I even hired a private investigator to follow you, hoping to find evidence that you were being unfaithful. Marcus felt like he had been punched in the gut. He had suspected that Patricia was working against him, but he had never imagined the extent of her campaign to destroy his marriage.
Did you find anything?
He asked quietly. Patricia shook her head, looking ashamed. Nothing. The investigator followed you for 2 months and found absolutely nothing questionable. You went to work, you came home to your family, you took your children to the park on weekends. You were exactly the kind of husband and father I'd convinced myself you weren't. The weight of her confession hung between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because it confirmed what he had always known about himself, and sadness because it meant that his marriage had been destroyed by lies and manipulation rather than any real incompatibility between him and Sarah. "Does Sarah know?"
Marcus asked.
"About the private investigator, about everything you did?" Patricia nodded, fresh tears forming in her eyes. "I told her about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She was so angry with me, Marcus. Angrier than I'd ever seen her. She didn't speak to me for almost a year. And now? Now she speaks to me, but things are different between us. She lost trust in me, and I can't blame her. I destroyed her marriage based on my own fears and prejudices, and then I let her believe it was her decision. She knows that her relationship with Richard isn't real love, but she's afraid to trust her heart again. She's afraid that if she listens to her feelings instead of logic, she'll make another mistake." Marcus absorbed this information, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of him felt vindicated to know that Sarah now understood the truth about their marriage. But a larger part of him felt sad for everyone involved, including Patricia, who clearly carried a heavy burden of guilt about her actions. Their food arrived, and they ate in relative silence for a while, both processing the revelations that had emerged from their unexpected conversation. The chicken masala was excellent, and the salmon was perfectly prepared. But neither of them was really focused on the meal. They were both grappling with the strange turn their evening had taken. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. "What happens now, Marcus? I mean, after tonight? Do we pretend this never happened? Do we go back to being strangers who share grandchildren?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I don't know, Mrs. Boover. Mitchell, but I do know that I'm glad this happened, as strange as that might sound. I think we both needed this conversation. Maybe it's time we stopped being enemies and started being what we should have been all along." "What's that?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years, Patricia saw no trace of anger or resentment in his expression. "Family," he said simply. The word hung in the air between them, carrying with it the promise of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Not romantic love, certainly, but something perhaps even more valuable. Understanding, forgiveness, and the possibility of building a relationship based on their shared love for Zoe and David rather than their past conflicts. As their dinner progressed, the conversation between Marcus and Patricia took on a surreal quality that neither of them could have imagined when they first sat down. Here were two people who had been bitter enemies, now talking like old friends who were catching up after years apart. The other diners in the restaurant had long since stopped paying attention to their table, but Marcus and Patricia were creating their own little bubble of reconciliation in the midst of the elegant dining room. Patricia found herself sharing stories about Zoe and David that Marcus had never heard before. She told him about the way Zoe would insist on calling her every Sunday evening to tell her about her week, how David had inherited Marcus's love of building things and spent hours constructing elaborate structures with his building blocks whenever he visited her house. "He built a replica of the Atlanta skyline last month," Patricia said, her eyes lighting up with grandmotherly pride. "It was remarkably accurate for a 7-year-old. He even included the Western Peachtree Plaza, with its distinctive cylindrical shape. When I asked him how he knew so much about the buildings downtown, he said you had been teaching him about architecture during your weekend walks." Marcus smiled, remembering those walks. Every other Saturday, he would take the children downtown and they would explore different neighborhoods, talking about the history of the buildings and the stories they told about the city's growth. It was one of his favorite traditions with his kids, and he was touched to know that David had been paying such close attention. "Zoe has been asking about dance lessons," Patricia continued. "She saw a performance of The Nutcracker at the Fox Theatre and has been obsessed with ballet ever since. Sarah mentioned that she couldn't afford the lessons right now, what with the wedding planning and everything." Marcus made a mental note to look into dance classes for Zoe. His custody agreement included provisions for extracurricular activities, and he had money set aside specifically for things like music lessons, sports, and other activities that would enrich his children's lives. The fact that Sarah was struggling financially surprised him, given that she was engaged to a successful lawyer, but he didn't want to pry into her personal business. "I'd be happy to pay for the dance lessons," Marcus said. "Zoe should be able to pursue her interests. Would you be willing to help me find a good dance school for her?" Patricia's eyes widened with surprise. "You would want my help with that?" "Mrs. Gia, Mitchell, you're Zoe's grandmother. You know her better than almost anyone, and I trust your judgment when it comes to what's best for her. Besides," Marcus added with a smile, You have excellent taste. I'm sure you'd find the perfect dance school. The idea of Marcus asking for her help, trusting her judgment about something important to their granddaughter, was almost overwhelming for Patricia. For 3 years, she had lived with the belief that she had permanently damaged her relationship not just with Marcus, but with her grandchildren's ability to have a healthy extended family. Now, unexpectedly, she was being offered a chance to be part of the solution instead of the problem. As they continued talking, Patricia began to see sides of Marcus that she had refused to acknowledge during their years as adversaries. She heard about his volunteer work with Big Brothers Big Sisters, where he mentored young men from single-parent homes. She learned about his efforts to advance diversity in the tech industry, serving on panels and speaking at conferences about creating more inclusive workplace environments. Marcus, in turn, was learning things about Patricia that surprised him. She had started a scholarship fund for underprivileged students at her alma mater, focusing particularly on young women who wanted to pursue careers in business but lacked the financial resources to do so. She volunteered regularly at a literacy program for adults who had never learned to read properly, and she had been quietly helping several families in her church with everything from job placement to emergency financial assistance. "I think I misjudged you," Marcus said as their server cleared away their dinner plates. "All those years I saw you as this cold, judgmental woman who looked down on everyone who didn't meet your standards. But listening to you talk about your volunteer work, seeing how much you love Zoe and David, I realized I was seeing what I expected to see rather than who you really are." Patricia looked down at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. "You weren't entirely wrong, Marcus. I can be cold and judgmental. I do have standards that are probably too rigid. And I did look down on you, which was wrong and unfair. But you're right that there's more to me than that. I think maybe there's more to both of us than we allowed ourselves to see." The server returned to offer dessert and coffee, and somewhat to their own surprise, both Marcus and Patricia agreed to extend their evening. They ordered tiramisu to share and 2 cups of coffee, as if they were old friends who couldn't bear to end their time together. As they waited for dessert, Patricia asked Marcus about his dating life. "Have you been seeing anyone? Besides tonight's mix-up?" Marcus laughed, the sound genuine and relaxed. "This is actually only the 3rd date I've been on since the divorce." The other 2 were disasters. One woman spent the entire evening talking about her ex-husband, and the other one seemed to think that being a single father made me desperate enough to put up with anything. "I'm sorry," Patricia said, and she genuinely meant it. "You deserve to find someone who appreciates what a good man you are." "What kind of person are you looking for?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He had never expected to have a conversation about his romantic life with his ex-mother-in-law, but the whole evening had been full of unexpected moments. "Someone kind," he said after thinking for a moment. "Someone who understands that my children will always be my first priority, but who wants to be part of our family rather than competing with them for my attention. Someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me to be better, who has her own life and interests but wants to share them with me." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds reasonable. And important qualities in a potential stepmother for Zoe and David." The mention of a potential stepmother brought up complicated feelings for both of them. Patricia realized that someday someone else would be helping to raise her grandchildren, making decisions about their lives, influencing their values and beliefs. Marcus realized that he would eventually need to navigate the complex dynamics of blending families while maintaining his relationship with Sarah and her family. "I worry about that sometimes," Marcus admitted, "about how the kids would adjust to having someone new in our lives. They've been through so much already with the divorce. I don't want to put them through more upheaval unless I'm absolutely certain about the person."
"They're resilient," Patricia said.
"Children are more adaptable than we give them credit for. As long as they know they're loved and that their security isn't threatened, they'll adjust. And honestly, it might be good for them to see you happy and settled. Right now, they see their mother planning a wedding to someone she doesn't really love, and they see you alone. That's not a healthy model for what relationships should look like." Her words hit closer to home than Marcus had expected. He had been so focused on not disrupting his children's lives that he hadn't considered how his prolonged singleness might be affecting them. Did they think he was lonely? Did they worry about him being by himself in his apartment while they were with their mother? The tiramisu arrived, and they both took appreciative bites of the rich, coffee-flavored dessert. As they ate, Patricia brought up a subject that had been weighing on her mind for months. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you still have feelings for Sarah?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus set down his spoon and considered his answer carefully. It was a fair question, and Patricia deserved an honest response. "I'll always love Sarah," he said finally. She's the mother of my children, and she was my first real love. But am I in love with her? No, I don't think I am. Too much has happened, too much trust has been broken. Even if she wanted to reconcile tomorrow, I don't think we could rebuild what we had. Patricia nodded, seeming to understand the distinction he was making. What if she did want to reconcile? What if she broke up with Richard and came to you, saying she realized she had made a mistake? Marcus thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, the answer might have been different. 6 months ago, he still harbored fantasies about his family getting back together, about finding a way to heal the wounds and start over. But time and therapy had helped him accept that some things couldn't be fixed, only forgiven. I think I would wish her well and encourage her to take time to figure out what she really wants, Marcus said. But I wouldn't take her back. We're different people now than we were when we got married. We've both been changed by what we've been through. Even without all the external pressure we faced, I'm not sure we would be compatible anymore. Patricia seemed both relieved and saddened by his answer. Relieved, perhaps, because it meant that Marcus had truly moved on and wasn't carrying a torch for her daughter. Saddened, because it confirmed what she had suspected for a long time, that her interference had not just temporarily damaged their marriage, but had destroyed it permanently. I've been hoping that someday she would come to her senses and fight for you, Patricia admitted. I know that's selfish, considering everything I did to break you apart. But I've been living with the guilt of knowing that I destroyed something beautiful, and I kept thinking that maybe if you two got back together, I could somehow make amends for what I did. Marcus reached across the table and took Patricia's hand again, a gesture that was becoming surprisingly natural between them. Mrs. Mitchell, you can't fix the past by trying to recreate it. Sarah and I happened for a reason, and we ended for a reason, but that doesn't mean it was all meaningless. We had some beautiful years together, we created 2 amazing children, and we learned things about ourselves that we needed to learn. Sometimes love doesn't last forever, but that doesn't mean it wasn't real or valuable while it existed. Patricia squeezed his hand, marveling at the wisdom and maturity of this man she had once dismissed as unworthy of her daughter. When did you become so wise? Marcus laughed. 3 years of therapy and a lot of sleepless nights, thinking about what went wrong and how I could do better next time. Plus, my kids have taught me more about forgiveness and moving forward than any self-help book ever could. Their server appeared with the check, and both Marcus and Patricia reached for it simultaneously. They looked at each other and burst into laughter, the absurdity of their situation suddenly hitting them both at the same time. I think this might be the strangest first date in the history of dating, Marcus said, still chuckling. First date? Patricia raised an eyebrow. Is that what this was? Marcus grinned. Well, we were both set up by well-meaning friends, we had dinner at a nice restaurant, we shared dessert, and we learned things about each other that we never knew before. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck. Patricia shook her head, but she was smiling. In that case, I think I should probably tell you that you're a little young for me. And you're a little too closely related to my ex-wife for my comfort, Marcus replied. I think we might have to chalk this up to incompatibility. They both laughed again, and Marcus insisted on paying the check. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Patricia felt a mixture of sadness and hope that she couldn't quite explain. Sadness because the evening was ending, and she wasn't sure when or if she would have another opportunity to talk with Marcus like this. Hope because for the first time in 3 years she felt like there might be a path forward that didn't involve carrying guilt and regret for the rest of her life. As they walked out of the garden table together, Marcus turned to Patricia with a serious expression. Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that tonight has meant more to me than I can adequately express. For 3 years I've carried around anger and resentment that was poisoning my ability to move forward. Tonight, you've given me something I didn't even realize I needed. What's that? Understanding, closure, and maybe most importantly, hope that people can change, that mistakes can be forgiven, and that it's never too late to choose a different path. Patricia felt tears forming in her eyes again. What happens now, Marcus? I mean, where do we go from here? Marcus smiled, and in that smile, Patricia saw not just forgiveness, but genuine affection. I think we start over, Mrs. Mitchell. I think we become the family that Zoe and David deserve to have. And I think we help each other figure out how to be happy again. As they stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, 2 people who had once been bitter enemies, now united by their shared love for 2 children and their mutual recognition that life was too short to waste on grudges, Patricia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt hope. The weeks following their unexpected dinner together brought changes that neither Marcus nor Patricia could have anticipated. What started as a bizarre blind date mix-up had evolved into something much more significant. the beginning of a genuine friendship and a complete restructuring of their family dynamics. Marcus found himself looking forward to Patricia's texts about the children's activities and achievements. She would send him photos of Zoe's artwork from school, or videos of David building increasingly complex structures with his blocks. In return, Marcus started including Patricia in more of his parenting decisions, asking for her input on everything from which summer camp might be best for the kids to how to handle Zoe's sudden fear of thunderstorms. The first real test of their newfound relationship came 3 weeks after their dinner, when Zoe came down with a severe case of strep throat. Sarah was out of town for Richard's law firm retreat, and the children were staying with Marcus for an extended weekend. When Zoe's fever spiked to 103 degrees in the middle of the night, Marcus found himself in the emergency room, feeling overwhelmed and wishing he had backup. Without really thinking about it, he called Patricia. She answered on the second ring, despite it being 2 in the morning. When Marcus explained the situation, she didn't hesitate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. "Emergency room at Children's Healthcare? You don't have to do that, Mrs. Mitchell. I just thought you should know what was happening in case Sarah calls you looking for updates." "Marcus," Patricia said firmly, "that little girl is my granddaughter, and you're dealing with this alone, in the middle of the night. Of course I'm coming." When Patricia arrived at the hospital, still in her pajamas with a hastily thrown-on coat, she brought supplies, juice boxes for David, who had to come along because Marcus couldn't leave him alone, a soft blanket for Zoe, and a thermos of coffee for Marcus. She sat with David while Marcus talked to the doctors, entertaining the frightened 7-year-old with quiet games and stories. As they waited for Zoe's test results, David climbed onto Patricia's lap and fell asleep against her shoulder. Marcus watched this scene with amazement, remembering how formal and distant Patricia had always been with the children during his marriage to Sarah. Now she was humming softly to David, stroking his hair with the tenderness of a devoted grandmother. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, "for coming, for helping. I don't know what I would have done without you tonight." Patricia looked up from David's sleeping form. "This is what family does, Marcus. We show up for each other, especially during the hard times." The word family still felt strange coming from Patricia, but Marcus was beginning to believe that she meant it. When the doctor confirmed that Zoe had strep throat and prescribed antibiotics, Patricia insisted on following Marcus back to his apartment to help get both children settled. She stayed until morning, making sure Zoe's fever broke and that Marcus had everything he needed to care for a sick child while managing his work responsibilities. Word of Patricia's middle-of-the-night hospital visit spread through their social circles with the speed of a wildfire. Sarah heard about it from a mutual friend and called Marcus in a state of confusion and concern.
"My mother went to the hospital with you?"
Sarah asked, as if Marcus had just told her that Patricia had joined the circus. "My mother, who used to complain that she couldn't stand the smell of antiseptic and refused to visit me when I had my wisdom teeth removed." Marcus couldn't help but smile at Sarah's bewilderment. She was incredible, Sarah. Really supportive and helpful. The kids were so grateful to have their grandmother there. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, what's going on between you and my mother? People are talking." "They're saying you two had dinner together, that you're friends now. That can't be right." Marcus chose his words carefully. He didn't want to create problems for Sarah, but he also wasn't going to apologize for the positive relationship he was building with Patricia. "Your mother and I ran into each other a few weeks ago, and we ended up talking. We both realized that we had been carrying around a lot of unnecessary anger and resentment. We decided it would be better for everyone, especially Zoe and David, if we tried to get along."
"You ran into each other?"
"Where?" Marcus hesitated. The truth about their blind date mix-up was bound to come out eventually, but he wasn't sure Sarah was ready to hear it. "At a restaurant in Midtown. We were both there for dinner." "Together?" "It's complicated, Sarah. The important thing is that we worked through our differences, and now the kids have grandparents and a father who can actually be in the same room without World War III breaking out." Sarah was quiet for a long time, processing this information. Marcus could almost hear the wheels turning in her head as she tried to understand how the two people who had hated each other most in the world had suddenly become allies. "Are you dating my mother?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice rising with something that might have been panic. Marcus burst out laughing, which probably wasn't the most diplomatic response. "No, Sarah, I am definitely not dating your mother. We're friends. We're family, in a weird, complicated way. But romance is absolutely not part of the equation." "Oh." Sarah sounded relieved but still confused. "It's just that people have been saying, people always say things, especially when they don't understand the situation, Marcus said gently. The truth is, your mother and I both love Zoe and David more than anything else in the world. We realized that fighting each other was hurting them, so we decided to stop fighting. That's all. But it wasn't quite all, and Marcus knew it. His friendship with Patricia had become something more complex than just co-grandparenting. She had become a confidant, someone he could talk to about the challenges of single parenthood, someone who understood his children's needs and personalities in a way that few other people did. In some ways, Patricia was becoming the family support system that Marcus had always wished he'd had. The real test of their new dynamic came when Zoe's dance recital approached. Marcus had enrolled her in ballet classes as promised, and Patricia had indeed helped him find the perfect school. Zoe was performing in her first recital, and both Marcus and Sarah would be there, along with Richard and Patricia. It would be the first time all the adults in Zoe's life would be in the same room since the divorce. Sarah was nervous about the potential for awkwardness or conflict. Richard was suspicious of the reports he'd heard about Marcus and Patricia's newfound friendship, wondering if there was some kind of manipulation or ulterior motive involved. Marcus was anxious about whether their new relationship would hold up under the pressure of a formal family gathering. But Patricia surprised them all by taking charge of the situation in the most graceful way possible. She made dinner reservations for everyone at Zoe's favorite restaurant, suggesting that they celebrate together as a family regardless of their complicated history. When Sarah expressed concern about potential awkwardness, Patricia simply said Zoe doesn't care about adult drama. She cares about having all the people who love her there to celebrate her accomplishment. The evening of the recital, Zoe was radiant in her pink tulle costume, her hair perfectly pinned in a bun that Patricia had helped create. She performed beautifully, her face glowing with pride and joy as she spotted all her family members in the audience. After the performance, as they gathered for photos, something magical happened. David, who had been squirming through most of the recital, suddenly ran up to Marcus and threw his arms around his waist. "Daddy, can we all go to dinner together, like a real family?" The question hung in the air, innocent and devastating in its simplicity. Sarah looked uncomfortable, Richard looked annoyed, and Marcus felt his heart breaking for his son, who clearly missed having all the important adults in his life together in one place. It was Patricia who saved the moment. She knelt down to David's level and said, "We are a real family, sweetheart. Families come in all different shapes and sizes. Some families live in the same house, and some families live in different houses but still love each other very much. Tonight, we're all here together to celebrate your sister, because that's what families do." David seemed to accept this explanation, and the tension in the group visibly relaxed. At dinner, Patricia made sure the conversation stayed focused on Zoe's performance and the children's upcoming activities. She asked Richard about his work, complimented Sarah on her engagement ring, and treated everyone with the kind of gracious hospitality that made the evening feel celebratory rather than awkward. After dinner, as they were all saying goodbye in the restaurant parking lot, Richard pulled Marcus aside. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing with Sarah's mother," he said in a low voice, "but I want it to stop. This whole friendship thing is weird and inappropriate, and it's confusing for the children." Marcus looked at Richard with a mixture of pity and irritation. Here was a man who was about to marry Sarah, about to become stepfather to Marcus's children, and he was more concerned with territory and appearances than with what was best for the family. "Richard," Marcus said calmly, "I'm not playing any games. Mrs. Mitchell and I have learned to get along because it's better for Zoe and David. If you're planning to marry Sarah and be part of this family, you're going to have to accept that we're all connected, whether we like it or not. You can either be part of building something positive, or you can create drama and conflict. The choice is yours." Richard's face reddened with anger, but before he could respond, Sarah appeared at their sides. "Is everything okay?" she asked, sensing the tension between the two men. "Everything's fine," Marcus said smoothly. "Richard was just telling me how much he enjoyed tonight." As Marcus drove home with Zoe and David chattering excitedly in the back seat about the recital, he reflected on how much their family dynamics had changed in such a short time. Patricia's presence in their lives had created stability and continuity that hadn't existed since the divorce. The children were happier, more secure, and less confused about their place in the complicated web of adult relationships. But Marcus was also aware that not everyone was comfortable with these changes. Richard clearly saw Patricia and Marcus's friendship as a threat to his relationship with Sarah. Some of Marcus's friends thought he was crazy to trust the woman who had once tried to destroy his marriage. Even Jake, who had inadvertently created the situation by mixing up their blind dates, was skeptical about whether Patricia's change of heart was genuine or strategic. "I just don't want you to get hurt again," Jake said when Marcus told him about Patricia's late-night hospital visit. "This is the same woman who hired a private investigator to follow you, who poisoned Sarah against you for years. People don't change that dramatically overnight." Marcus understood Jake's concern, but he had seen something in Patricia that convinced him her transformation was real. He had seen her vulnerability when she talked about her first husband's abandonment, her genuine remorse when she confessed to her role in destroying his marriage, and her authentic love for his children. More importantly, he had seen her actions consistently match her words over the course of several weeks. "People can change, Jake," Marcus said. "Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances to show them who they really want to be." The real validation of Marcus's faith in Patricia came from an unexpected source: his children. Zoe started asking if she could call her grandmother more often, and David began including Patricia in his bedtime prayers along with all the other people he loved. They were responding to the genuine warmth and affection she was showing them, and their happiness was all the proof Marcus needed that he was making the right choice in rebuilding this relationship. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus and Patricia settled into a comfortable routine of co-grandparenting that felt natural and sustainable. She would pick up the children from school on days when Marcus had to work late, and he would include her in weekend activities when the kids wanted their grandmother to join them for trips to the zoo or the children's museum. Their friendship had also begun to extend beyond just childcare coordination. Patricia had started asking Marcus for advice about her own life, particularly her growing concerns about Sarah's upcoming marriage to Richard. Marcus, in turn, found himself confiding in Patricia about his dating life and his hopes for the future. It was a delicate balance, navigating their roles as former adversaries, current friends, and permanent family members. But somehow, they were making it work, creating something new and positive from the ashes of their old animosity. The transformation in Marcus and Patricia's relationship reached its most profound test 6 months after their accidental dinner date, when Sarah made a decision that shocked everyone who knew her. 3 weeks before her wedding to Richard, she called off the engagement. Marcus first heard about it from Patricia, who called him at work in tears. "She's at my house," Patricia said, her voice shaky with emotion. "She showed up an hour ago with her wedding dress and all the gifts people had already sent. She says she can't go through with it, that marrying Richard would be the biggest mistake of her life." Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions as he processed this news. Part of him felt vindicated that Sarah had finally recognized what he had suspected all along, that her relationship with Richard was based more on logic than love. But a larger part of him felt concerned for everyone involved, including Richard, who was probably devastated by this sudden turn of events.
"Is she okay?" Marcus asked.
"What does she need?" Patricia's voice was full of admiration as she answered. "She asked me to call you. She said she needed to talk to the one person who might understand why she's making this choice. Marcus, I think she wants to apologize to you for what happened between you two." Marcus left work early and drove to Patricia's house, uncertain about what he would find when he got there. He hadn't been inside Patricia's home since before the divorce, and returning to that environment brought back a flood of memories, both good and painful. Sarah was sitting in Patricia's living room, still in the business suit she had worn to work that morning, surrounded by the detritus of her cancelled wedding, unopened gifts, vendor contracts, and a wedding dress that she had apparently brought straight from the bridal shop, where she was supposed to have her final fitting. When Marcus walked in, Sarah looked up with red-rimmed eyes and attempted a smile. "Hi, Marcus." "Thank you for coming." Marcus sat down across from her, his heart aching for what she was clearly going through. "Are you okay? Do you want to talk about what happened?" Sarah took a deep breath and began to tell the story. She had been getting ready for her final dress fitting when she suddenly realized that she felt nothing. No excitement, no nervousness, no anticipation. She was about to marry a man she respected but didn't love, and the realization hit her like a physical blow. "I kept thinking about our wedding day," Sarah said, looking directly at Marcus for the first time. "Do you remember how I couldn't stop smiling? How my face actually hurt by the end of the day because I had been grinning for so many hours?" Marcus remembered. Sarah had been radiant that day, glowing with happiness and love. It had been one of the most beautiful weddings he had ever attended, made even more special because it was his own. "I realized that I would never feel that way about marrying Richard," Sarah continued. "And he deserves better than that. He deserves someone who lights up at the thought of spending forever with him, not someone who's marrying him because he checks all the boxes on her mother's list of suitable husbands." Patricia, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, came into the room and sat beside her daughter on the couch. I told her that I'm proud of her for having the courage to be honest, even though it's painful for everyone involved. Marcus was struck by this response. 3 years ago, Patricia would have been furious that Sarah was walking away from such an advantageous marriage. The fact that she was supporting her daughter's decision to follow her heart rather than her head showed just how much Patricia herself had changed. "What will you do now?" Marcus asked gently. Sarah shrugged, looking lost and uncertain. "I don't know. I guess I'll figure out how to be single again. Maybe I'll travel, take some time to rediscover who I am, when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants me to be." The conversation continued for several hours, with Sarah, Marcus, and Patricia talking openly about the past, present, and future in ways they never had before. Sarah apologized to Marcus for allowing her mother's influence to poison their marriage, and she acknowledged that she should have fought harder for their relationship instead of taking the easier path of giving in to external pressure. Marcus, in turn, apologized for not being more understanding of the position Sarah had been in, caught between her love for him and her complicated relationship with her mother. He admitted that he had sometimes been so focused on proving himself worthy that he had lost sight of what Sarah actually needed from him as a partner. Patricia listened to these exchanges with tears in her eyes, seeing clearly for the first time the full extent of the damage her interference had caused. But she also saw something else. The deep love and respect that Marcus and Sarah still had for each other, even though they both understood that they couldn't go back to being married. As the evening wore on, the conversation naturally turned to Zoe and David, and how this latest upheaval would affect them. The children had been looking forward to the wedding, excited about having a stepfather, and the idea of their family growing bigger. Now they would need to be told that those plans had changed. "I want to tell them together," Sarah said. "All three of us. I think they need to see that even though their family doesn't look like other families, all the adults who love them can work together to make sure they feel safe and supported." Marcus agreed, and Patricia offered to help facilitate the conversation. Over the next few days, they worked together to find the right words to explain to two young children why sometimes adults change their minds about important decisions and how that doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong. The conversation with Zoe and David went better than anyone expected. Zoe, now 9 years old and wise beyond her years, simply asked if this meant that Grandma Patricia would still be part of their lives. When she was assured that nothing would change about their relationship with their grandmother, she seemed satisfied. David, now 8, was more concerned about practical matters. "Does this mean we don't get to eat wedding cake?" he asked seriously. Patricia solved that problem by ordering a cake from the bakery where Sarah's wedding cake was supposed to have been made, and they had their own celebration dinner to mark Sarah's courage in making a difficult but honest choice. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found himself in the unusual position of helping his ex-wife navigate the aftermath of her broken engagement. He helped her return wedding gifts, listened when she needed to process her feelings about the situation, and provided a stable presence for their children during what could have been a traumatic time. This period also deepened his friendship with Patricia in unexpected ways. She confided in him about her fears that Sarah would never find love again, that her interference in their marriage had damaged her daughter's ability to trust her own heart. Marcus assured her that Sarah was stronger than she looked and that she would find her way to happiness, but it might take time. "I keep thinking about what you said that night at the restaurant," Patricia told Marcus one afternoon as they watched Zoe and David play in the park. "About how love doesn't have to last forever to be real and valuable." Maybe Sarah and Richard taught each other something important, even if they weren't meant to be married. Marcus nodded, appreciating Patricia's growing wisdom about relationships and life in general. "And maybe you and I needed to go through everything we went through to get to this place where we can actually be friends and co-parents. Maybe it all happened for a reason." The most surprising development came 3 months after Sarah's broken engagement, when Marcus met someone who would change his life in ways he never expected. Her name was Dr. Angela Foster, and she was a pediatric surgeon at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, where Zoe had been treated for her strep throat. Marcus met Angela when he brought David to the emergency room after the boy broke his arm falling off his bike. Angela wasn't David's doctor, but she happened to be in the ER when Marcus arrived, looking frantic and overwhelmed. She helped calm both Marcus and David, explaining the treatment process and making sure they felt comfortable and informed. What struck Marcus most about Angela wasn't just her professional competence, but her genuine warmth and the way she treated David like a whole person, rather than just a medical case. She was beautiful, certainly, with natural hair that she wore in lokes and kind eyes that seemed to see everything. But it was her character that captured Marcus's attention. When Angela casually mentioned that she was single and new to Atlanta, Having just finished her residency in Chicago, Marcus found himself asking if she would like to grab coffee sometime. To his delight and surprise, she said yes. Their first real date was everything Marcus had hoped for, and nothing like his previous dating disasters. Angela was intelligent and funny, with a quick wit and a passion for her work that reminded Marcus of his own drive and ambition. She was also genuinely interested in hearing about his children, asking thoughtful questions about their personalities and interests, rather than treating them as obstacles to overcome. What impressed Marcus most was how Angela handled meeting Zoe and David for the first time. Instead of trying too hard to win them over or competing with their mother for their affection, she simply treated them as individuals worthy of respect and attention. She listened to Zoe's detailed explanations of ballet positions and engaged seriously with David's engineering projects. Patricia was the first person Marcus told about his growing relationship with Angela. He had been nervous about how she would react to the news that he was seeing someone seriously, but Patricia surprised him with her enthusiasm and support. "I'm so happy for you, Marcus," Patricia said when he told her about Angela. "From everything you've told me about her, she sounds like exactly the kind of person you deserve to have in your life." The real test came when Marcus decided to introduce Angela to his extended family, including Sarah and Patricia. He was nervous about how the dynamics would work, particularly given how unusual his relationship with his ex-mother-in-law had become. The occasion was David's 9th birthday party, and Marcus had invited Angela to join the celebration. Sarah had volunteered to host the party at her house, and Patricia was handling the decorations and cake. It would be the first time Angela met Sarah, and Marcus wasn't sure how that encounter would go. As it turned out, he needn't have worried. Angela approached the situation with the same grace and professionalism she brought to her medical practice. She was friendly, but not overly familiar with Sarah, respectful of the existing family dynamics, and focused primarily on making sure David had a wonderful birthday. Sarah, for her part, seemed relieved to meet someone who clearly made Marcus happy, but didn't seem interested in creating drama or complications. She later told Patricia that Angela seemed like exactly the kind of person Marcus should be with, someone who complements his strengths and challenges him to grow. The evening of David's party, as they were cleaning up after the celebration, Patricia pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation. "I want you to know something," she said. "Watching you tonight with Angela, seeing how happy you are, how relaxed and confident, it's the first time since before the divorce that you've looked truly at peace." Marcus smiled, feeling the truth of her words. "I am at peace, Mrs. Mitchell. Not just because of Angela, but because of everything that's happened over the past year. Because we figured out how to be family in a new way. Because Sarah found the courage to be honest about what she wanted. Because the kids are happy and secure. All of it." Patricia nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I have something I need to tell you, Marcus. Something I should have said a long time ago." She paused, gathering her courage. "I'm proud of you. Proud of the man you are, proud of the father you've become. Proud of the grace you've shown in dealing with all of us and our complicated family situation. I was wrong about you from the very beginning, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was right in front of me." The admission hung between them, powerful in its simplicity and sincerity. Marcus felt tears forming in his own eyes as he processed the words he had never expected to hear from this woman who had once been his greatest adversary. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means more to me than you know." As they stood in Sarah's kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a successful birthday party, Marcus reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all to this moment. A year ago, he had been a bitter, lonely single father struggling to rebuild his life after a devastating divorce. Now he was part of a complex but loving extended family, in a healthy relationship with a woman who cherished him, and at peace with his past. The story had come full circle in the most unexpected way. The blind date that had brought him face to face with his former enemy had ultimately led to healing, forgiveness, and a new understanding of what family really meant. Sometimes the most profound changes in life came not from dramatic gestures or grand plans, but from simple acts of courage. The courage to stay in an uncomfortable situation, the courage to listen to someone else's perspective, and the courage to choose grace over grudges. As Marcus drove home that night with Zoe and David chattering excitedly in the back seat about their day, he thought about calling Angela to tell her how the evening had gone. He thought about the future they were building together, the possibility of marriage and more children, the dream of creating a blended family that would give Zoe and David even more people to love them. But mostly, he thought about the lesson he had learned from the most unlikely teacher, that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of anger toward others, but about creating space for relationships to grow and change in ways that seemed impossible before. Patricia Mitchell had taught him that people could surprise you, that second chances were worth giving, and that family wasn't just about blood or marriage, but about choosing to love and support each other through all of life's complications. The black single dad who had walked into that restaurant 6 months ago expecting to meet a potential romantic partner had instead found something even more valuable. Proof that grace, patience, and an open heart could transform even the most damaged relationships into something beautiful and strong. And in the end, that transformation had shocked everyone most of all.